This is the Tree of Life, Season 17, Chapter 4. In this episode, we will be reintegrating concepts, such as dissonant spaces, and the spatial non-consensual state to the analysis in this season. To start off, just as there can be a deficit with respect to the conversion of digital to analog structures, which I called a self-conscious deficit, there can also be an overabundance of analog structures in relation to a self-conscious subject. This state, described as a surplus of analog structures, is described by the term I called the spatial non-consensual state. Since analog structures describe the continuum of non-exclusivity to exclusivity through context exclusion, it is a more plastic or plural state than the former. In this state, a self-conscious subject may find themselves described by non-exclusive word associations at one end of the continuum, in the absence of any digital structures. This is so because although analog structures become more exclusive through context interlinking, that linking requires parallel digital and analog structures. Thus, we can see that when the surplus of analog structures is too disproportionate, the result is a failure of context interlinking and therefore context exclusion. In that state, the impulses of the analog structures are entirely non-exclusionary. Thus, at that end of the continuum, we can see a plural or plastic state, which is fully contextual. Likewise, this state, which is not a state free of self-consciousness exactly, since that self-consciousness is preserved in the arrangement of digital structures relative to some self-conscious subject. It is more of a void of self-consciousness, a kind of bubble of subjectivity. The process described in Season 17 Chapter 2 tends to recapitulate affirmation of conventional impulses, what I called fundamental impulses. These are impulses which reflect a conjoined reality. The converse, described by the spatial non-consensual state, is the creation of a dissonant space, a network of analog structures which dislodge conventionality. How do they dislodge conventionality? By what they exclude, by what is negated in their structures. Thus, it is not unusual for a spatial non-consensual state described above to produce a displacement of affirmation of a particular impulse upon some other self-conscious subject. This is so both because analog structures are associated with spatiality and contextuality through path parsimony. Thus, it can be said that a surplus of analog structures can create a field of exclusion defined as a dissonant space. This means that in fact two or more forms of parallel networks can exist simultaneously. Those defined by context exclusion and those defined by a digital exclusion. That's the end of the podcast for today.